Okay, we've started the recording. And Robert, if you'd like to kick us off now.
I will, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to Cradle-to-Career's third strategic planning meeting. My name is Robert Tagorda and I'm the chair of this ad hoc committee. As a reminder, today's meeting will be run according to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act as required by law. So we plan to end today's meeting around 2:30 p.m. Next slide, please. So I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask that Mary Kate Cruz-Jones please call the roll.
Robert Tagorda.
Present.
Catalina Cifuentes. Amy Fong.
Here.
Jessica Moldoff.
Here.
Gavin Payne.
Present.
Javier Romero. Thomas Vu.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's go to the next slide then and review today's agenda. I'd like to remind first and foremost members of this committee that we'll be taking a roll call vote on all action items. To begin today's meeting, I'd first like to review what we're going to be discussing today. The committee members will first vote on the May 5 meeting minutes from our last strategic planning session. Jane Harrington from Leading Resources will then walk us through where we are in the process, what we've accomplished up to this point, and what pending work we'll still need to tackle. Next, we'll review the operations goal and revised objectives with a very specific focus on the new objective that has been drafted since the May 5th meeting. For agenda items 5 and 6, we will dig into the goal and objectives for practical tools and engagement. Next slide. Thereafter, there'll be an opportunity for community discussion, public comment, and a vote from the committee. Once we complete our discussion on practical tools and engagement, Jane will then walk us through next steps in the process and we'll open it up for general public comment regarding items not listed on the agenda. Thereafter, we'll move on to agenda item 9 by asking members for any future agenda items and let the public make requests as well. Then, once all business is concluded, we'll adjourn the meeting. Next slide. Okay, we'll now move to agenda item 2, approval of meeting minutes from the April 21 and May 5 strategic planning meetings. Let's begin with the April 21st meeting minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the meeting minutes from members? Seeing none, right now, may I have a motion to approve the April meeting minutes as submitted?
I'll move.
And the second?
Second.
Before we take action, let's pause for public comment. Mary Kate?
We'll now be opening it up for public comment. Could we advance maybe 2 slides here? Perfect. Thank you so much. So members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment, please use the chat feature. Or excuse me, if you could just raise your hand, that's what we will be doing. My apologies that this slide is not the most updated information. So please raise your hand as the chat feature has been disabled. And that will prompt you or allow me to know that you'd like to make a comment on this agenda item. I'm not seeing any hands at this time. So no public comment has been brought forth.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mary Kate, please do a roll call vote.
Robert?
Yes.
Catalina? Amy?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Gavin?
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
the motion passes.
Okay, so we're going to move and follow the same process for the May 5th meeting minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the meeting minutes from members? Seeing none thus far, may I have a motion to approve the May meeting minutes as submitted?
Sorry, Robert. I just wanted to know if there's a correction for Jane Harrington's name. On the screen, I
Right.
see G in the last name, but not in the minutes. Just type.
Very good. Thank you for that. Are there any other ideas that other committee members would like to bring forth at this moment? Okay, seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the May meeting minutes as revised?
So moved.
And the second?
Second.
Okay, before we take action, let's pause again for public comment. Mary Kate.
We will now be opening it up for public comment in case any members of the public would like to make a comment on the agenda item in front of us, which would be the May 10 meeting minutes. May 5. I am not seeing any hands from members in the public. I'll wait another moment. Still seeing none. We'll close public comment. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. So Mary Kate, please do a roll call vote.
Robert,
Yes.
Catalina, Amy,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, so both meeting minutes have been approved, and now we're going to move on to agenda item 3, discussion of the strategic planning approach. I'll turn it over now to Jane Harrington.
Thank you, Robert. Good afternoon, committee members and members of the public. It is nice to be with you all again. Where are we in the process? So we are on meeting 3 today. We're going to focus mainly on practical tools and engagement, but have one additional topic on there. We started this work on April 21st, which was our first meeting, and moved to meeting 2. We've got our third and final meeting today. And the next step will be presenting the work of this committee to the governing board at our August meeting. As a quick review, this is the organizer and the terminology that we've been using as we're doing this work. As we've talked about before, there was a lot of planning work done to stand up the office. And so we're relying on some of that original work around the mission, the vision, and also the charge as it was stated in legislation. The focus of this group has been to clarify and recommend goals and objectives for C2C moving forward. And then it will be the work of the office to make those actionable. So the orange, outer orange oval. Here is an example of a lot of that planning work that was done. So you've seen this a few times now, but again, looking at years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where we are in that process, and also how we've talked about the work in the past. So breaking it out into strategy and operations, engagement, analytical tools, and operational tools. We've modified those terms just slightly. For our work today, again, we'll be clarifying the goal, but getting really specific with those objectives. Those objectives will be around, like I said, practical tools and engagement. And so those are the short-term quantifiable results that we can aim to achieve in the next few years. As we're thinking about those, once we start looking at the objectives, we will be asking, what are we required to do? Right? What is in front of us through legislation that we must do? What's the logical order for the work that we need to tackle? What happens first? Where are their dependencies? What's within our control? What's not? What requires others' cooperation? What actually belongs to others? And then also, what's out of scope? As before, I'll be guiding us through these conversations, really hoping to get us to making recommendations so that we're ready for that August board meeting. For that reason, I might lean in just a little bit to keep us moving forward and focused. We could also use the concept of a parking lot if there's items that come up in this meeting today but aren't properly addressed, just given the focus of our work. Finally, I share this this Gantt chart, and not for the detail level, but more for the high level takeaway. It's a lot. It's a lot. And this is based on what's currently in front of the office and the board to accomplish in the next few years. If I just look at those bottom two rows, contribute P20W data points and ensure data quality, two very large tasks. So as we're thinking about objectives for the next few years, being sure that we're considering what's already in front of the office and that list of work streams and making sure that we're not compromising what the group is already committed to doing. Any questions from the committee on this? I know that was just a review.
Questions from any of the ad hoc committee members?
All right, seeing none, let's dive in.
Okay, so thanks, Jane, for reminding us what we've accomplished up to this point in the strategic planning process and laying out where we're going to be today. So let's now pivot toward discussion of Cradle-to-Career operations, goal, and objectives. During our last meeting, we worked on the operations goal and objectives, and the committee voted for the governing board chair and I to work with staff to incorporate the amendments from the committee. So our next agenda item will be the discussion of the amendments to the operations objectives with a specific focus on the new objective. So Jane, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Robert. Yes, like Robert shared, before we get into practical tools engagement, we're just going to rewind and revisit that operations goal. So you're going to recognize this. Nothing has changed since the last time you saw it. First off, we started with the problem around operations. I'm not going to read this out, but just give you a moment. And then we moved to the goal, and this was the language that was approved by this committee at the last meeting. But once it went back to the chairs of the committee to consider what those revisions might be, we realized that we might have forgotten a very important group of people, you, the governing board. The objectives focused a lot on what the office would be doing, but the office and the board work together, and we want to acknowledge that work and all the progress there. Additionally, you might recall from the February governing board meeting, Leading Resources provided a training, a workshop to the governing board regarding the 5 habits of high-performing public agency boards. We had a great conversation around that, just focusing on how to ensure great performance out of this governing board so that it can effectively serve the organization's needs. After reflecting on how we might implement that, we've proposing this language now to capture all the work and progress of the board. I'll read this one aloud. Build the C2C governing board's governance culture with focus on ambassadorship as measured in progress boards discussed at every governing board meeting and in an annual governance survey starting in fall 2023. I'm going to pause on this slide and see if there's any discussion from our committee members.
Question. The term progress boards is a term of art.
Let's see, who wants to field that question?
I'm happy to speak to that. I think we've internally used the word progress board to describe, for example, the visual that I shared at the last 2 governing board meetings that showed the steps in the preparation for the data transfer process with all of our data partners, and used color coding and words to show where we were along the process for those different steps.
Gotcha.
So that's what we've used the word progress board to describe so far in our governing board meetings.
Thanks. My only issue is potential confusion with the word boards there and our board meaning. And my only suggestion in this instance would be to just strike the word board and just talk about progress. That gives you more freedom to do it in whichever way you want to as well.
Okay, thank you. Thomas?
What excuse me, what do you mean by ambassadorship?
Who would like to field that?
Can start and perhaps I don't know if Robert or Amy want to join in on that. The way that I've heard this described is that the governing board members serve as ambassadors for Cradle-to-Career's work, both in the meetings, in conversations with the public in other settings, or with their own appointing entities. So for example, there are governor's office appointees who may need to keep their counterparts in the governor's office informed, same true for the legislative appointees and with members of the legislature or staff. And then for our data provider designees, it would be with their own home agencies or departments and in communicating with their colleagues or with leadership about the work of Cradle-to-Career. So that's how I've heard it described, but defer to the members of the committee.
Yeah, I would concur with that framing, Tom, in that what we're looking for here is some shared responsibility and ownership from the governing board standpoint as it relates to our objectives from an operational vantage point. Meaning, how do we ensure that all of our operational objectives are being accomplished through the support of our governing board? And in my view, it would likely start with ambassadorship, spearheading efforts at home agencies or providing sort of a public facing level of support as well for the operational goals that we have as an organization.
Yeah, I would concur with that as well. And I would like to add that in my opinion, it's probably not just, to me, it's the floor, not the ceiling, right? So it's an ability for governing board members to demonstrate, from their agency perspective, how they might be supporting the work of Cradle-to-Career, even as the office does much of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, I like that framing, Amy. It's the floor, not the ceiling. Because I do feel like when I'm here at the board, yes, I'm here to represent my labor agency, but when I'm back at home doing my daytime job, I feel like I'm required to advocate for our objectives here.
Right. I think that, so often we talk about really hard, smart goals and objectives, things that are measurable. And sometimes we don't acknowledge that there is a lot of effort that goes into speaking about communicating, influencing, getting additional support and visibility for a project like this.
Jessica?
Regarding, right, so speaking of measured, so that's kind of my question, where it says ambassadorship as measured in the progress. So is the idea that like we are measuring the extent to which all the governing board members are ambassadors through the progress that Cradle-to-Career is making? Is that kind of what it's saying, or is there going to be a progress board for ambassadorship?
Who'd like to field that?
I'd say that, go ahead.
I was wondering if Jane, in your work with other boards, are there some suggested metrics for something like this?
Absolutely. And that was part of this conversation is, what can that progress look like? What can we measure around that? So we know from the training and some of the feedback that we got from that board at the training with the dot voting on the wall, where they thought they could be a little bit more effective. So that might be a starting point, is really looking at their own self-reflection. And I think more specifically, Jessica, we are talking about measuring that actual ambassadorship. Did you go to a meeting? Did you represent this? And it's going to look different, like Marianne said, for all your different folks.
Yeah, I imagine primarily it would look different for those board members who are data provider representatives versus the non-data provider board members. So
yeah, exactly. And I think they were imagining, definitely taking that into account as we're looking at what reporting progress will look like. Thank you. What else?
I guess I'm just not really understanding the purpose of measuring this. I mean, do we get like a gold star or something, at the end of the year, or, it just seems kind of odd that, something like this would be measured. I think just having the expectation and understanding that, governing board members, do represent both, the entity that is appointing us, and that we also do represent the governing board as a whole. Whether it's communicating back to the appointing entity or to the community or community groups that we speak to. But it seems kind of odd that something like this would have to be measured.
I might jump in here. Thank you, Thomas. And back to, Amy's question on this. We work with a lot of boards. We see some high performing boards. We see some boards that are not as high performing. And so what we might be looking at here is also accountability, right? And how can we recognize all the hard work that the board members are doing? So I think that is really just what we're trying to measure there, and acknowledge that work that everyone's doing. Others?
Right.
I think, go ahead, Amy.
Sorry. All right. And for me, I think that it was an opportunity for us to acknowledge the differences in the types of board members and give them an opportunity to really think about, in what ways they're contributing to growing this data system, because it isn't just about the data partners.
Yeah, I foresee this conversation in terms of how we would measure progress with each governing board member's ambassadorship as part and parcel with what we're doing with LRI in terms of building the habits of a highly effective board. And I would say we probably would even start at a very rudimentary level, just understanding, are we seeing consistency in attendance, for example, across the board, because we definitely need representation and we need a quorum in order to operate. We've not had that as an issue up to this point, but you could obviously foresee a situation in which it might be. So you want to start there. I think another would be just levels of participation across ad hoc committees and various opportunities for deeper engagement with the office as another sort of layer. Certainly, it's something I've been thinking quite a bit about as we think about having diverse voices within our ad hoc committee, helping to spearhead the process. So those are a couple of just some really policy level ambassadorship that hasn't even gotten into the question of what our data provider governing board representatives are contributing on the back end, to which at this point we don't really have much visibility, right? The office has visibility into that. The governing board chairs have some visibility to that, but I think we want to uplift that and appreciate that there's a heavy lift for some governing board members that have to actually represent a data provider entity as well.
What else? Marianne.
Listening to the conversation, I'm wondering if changing the word boards to summaries might address Gavin's concern with confusion of the word boards. And that would also be a broad enough term that it could encompass both the visual that I described that I shared at the last 2 board meetings on progress for the data transmission, for instance, and it could also encompass any future summaries we put together on, board engagement and participation across ad hoc committees, for instance, or, public records of who was present and voted for different things over time. So it could be a broad enough term to encompass a wide range of progress summaries without using the word boards, which could cause confusion. The only other clarifying addition I would add is that the structure of this was meant to parallel the one that you voted on last time about the staff. And I'm just looking at page 3 of agenda item 4's material that's public on our website for those of you who are listening in. And that one said, build C2C's organizational culture with a focus on equity and shared values as measured in an annual employee engagement survey starting in spring 2024. And so the structure is kind of paralleling that with the, as measured in an annual employee engagement survey could be paralleled by the as measured in an annual governance survey. And so the structure of the sentence could either stay as is, or you could think about a different verb to precede progress summaries and then have the measurement focus on the annual governance survey.
Thoughts from any folks on those proposed revisions? And I just want to acknowledge time. We do have 2 large areas in front of us. So what's a good next step for this one?
Do members of the ad hoc committee feel sufficiently comfortable with the amendment the amended version of this text in front of you?
I think that's fine. I think it makes sense.
May I have a motion to recommend to the governing board to approve this new operations objective?
I'll move.
And a second. Okay. Second from Gavin. Before we take action, let's pause for public comment. So I'll turn it over to Mary Kate.
Perfect. If any members of the public would like to make a comment on this agenda item, please feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute you. Not seeing any hands raised at this time, I'll give you another moment. No movement. We'll close public comment.
So we have a motion and a second. Mary Kate, I'll turn it over to you for a roll call vote.
Robert, sorry, if I may, can we just edit the motion to say as edited in the meeting as opposed to specified in the staff report?
Very good, thank you. So the motion, as you see in front of you, is moved to recommend to the governing board to approve the new operations objective as amended in the, would it be in the staff meeting?
Meeting.
That was
As amended in the meeting.
in the meeting, yeah.
Okay. As amended in the meeting, so. Mary Kate,
Robert,
yes.
Catalina, Amy,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Tom,
No.
the motion passes.
Okay, so let's now move on to agenda item 5, discussion and possible action on practical tools, goal and objectives. Let me turn it over
Amy?
to,
Oh, I
yes,
see.
Amy.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Robert. It's been customary for us when we do our votes to capture the no and yes with reservations comments for the minute. So would we like to give Robert an Tom an opportunity
I
to?
would suggest not putting those in the minutes and that we not, it's really clear a yes, no vote. When we put a reservation and an explanation, we're either going to have to paraphrase what someone's voicing as their concern or put it in verbatim, which would be in a transcript. So for the clarity of minutes, my recommendation is that people do a yes, no vote without an explanation.
Thank you, Julia. Should we move to the next item?
Yes, I think we can move to this next item. Let me turn it over now to Jane and Marianne.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert. All right, great discussion there. We can jump in on the next level of discussion for practical tools. As before, I'll help guide us through the process, but again, lean on the experts in the room for some of the content. Marianne, would you like to talk us through the practical tools problem?
Yes, I'm happy to. So as Jean mentioned, we're now zooming in on the part of our work that focuses on californiacolleges.edu, e-transcript California, the practical tools that the state has decided to scale up that's aimed to address specific barriers that students face. So the way the problem has been drafted here is that students face confusing barriers in applying for college and financial aid, needing to navigate multiple platforms to complete applications and share information from their transcripts. These barriers can exacerbate existing disparities. So there are many problems, as you can imagine, that should and can and should be addressed across K-12 and higher education. The framing of this problem is kind of focused on the specific areas where Cradle-to-Career's work and partnership with these two tools and real-time data sharing across institutions can address that. So that's how the problem has been drafted so far. And then the goal is drafted as coordinate with partners to reduce barriers for applying to college and financial aid and expand the number of students who benefit from these tools by linking real-time information across institutions and communicating about these options to students. So again, the goal is kind of framed around this concept of reducing administrative burden, as we discussed in our last board meeting, and really focused on addressing the barriers that students face day to day.
All right, and the objectives.
Okay, so these are a number of drafted objectives that are specific, have specific dates associated with them. So I'll read through them. The first is create a roadmap for how each transcript can become a seamless platform for transferring transcripts across post-secondary institutions by summer 2024. So this objective is reflecting on kind of the different stages of our two partner practical tools and the work that we're doing this summer and plan for this fall in having conversations with the relevant stakeholders and making a clear roadmap for how e-transcript could become the seamless platform. So that's the first objective. The next two are both related to californiacolleges.edu. So promote californiacolleges.edu to become the state's one-stop shop for applying to public colleges and universities and for financial aid and for college and career planning by fall 2024. So fall 2024 was picked to align with two of the things that were announced at the last governing board meeting, the new MOU that was signed between CDE and CCGI for creating universal basic accounts in californiacolleges.edu by fall 2024, and the planned integration on the application side with UCOP to have the same kind of integration that CSU currently does.
And then our office and our collective work would be to continue to promote that platform and increase take-up. The third goal is championing the goal of reaching 95% of California's public high school students with accounts powered by real-time transcript data by summer 2026. And this is defined as California colleges.edu accounts. In reading this out loud, perhaps that's a clarification that would make that part clear. So this is the championing the goal of reaching 95% of California's public high school students with California colleges.edu accounts powered by real-time transcript data by summer 2026. And again, as a reminder, as you heard in the last board meeting, the real-time transcript data is what enables California colleges.edu's platform to do the alignment on A to G coursework in real time for the students and help provide more clarity for students as they prepare to apply for college.
Great, thank you, Marianne. So as the committee considers these objectives, I'll just remind you what to keep in mind. What are we required to do? What needs to happen first? Are there natural phases for the work that we're undertaking? And then what's really C2C's work versus what might belong to others? Where do we need their cooperation? And finally, what might be out of scope? So I'll start with Thomas, it looks like.
Curious why for the second point is limited to only public colleges and universities.
My understanding is that that's what's in scope right now for California colleges.edu. And in the application integration with the 3 higher education segments and the ability to kind of fully integrate those applications on the back end.
But shouldn't we take this opportunity to expand that to beyond public colleges and universities, considering the nonprofits educate something like 20% of undergraduate students? That's a large population that won't be captured under this, or nor represented, nor given an opportunity to apply under this. And considering this will be the one-stop shop for the state, I think it's pretty important to, to do that expansion now. And California Colleges EDU, AICCU actually helped start that. So, I think that's something to keep in mind as well. So, I would make the pitch for going ambitious, if you want to call it that, with this, and include the nonprofits. And I'm curious for the third point, where 95% came from. That's more of a curiosity thing than anything else.
Thank you, Thomas. Anybody like to address either of those items?
I was going to say we could explore the feasibility of what you mentioned with the nonprofit universities. I think some questions where I would need more clarity is if that would mean kind of, I know that in their college and career planning tools, my understanding is that those include both the public and the nonprofit universities. It's not limited to public if people are interested in exploring options, but the kind of application integration that happens with data transfer between CSU and California colleges.edu and soon with the UC, that kind of direct application integration across many dozens of institutions might be a lift that I don't feel like I can speak to in this meeting, but our office would be happy to explore the feasibility of that with California colleges.edu. That would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a start to start that type of outreach now. Perhaps there's something that we can discuss about, at least the institutions that use Common App. And, perhaps that it can be started there and then, over the incoming years expanded to those that do not. But, at the least, we can start having those discussions about the nonprofit. Good to have this and have that in as an objective now for this.
Are the community colleges embedded in this along with UC and CSU, or is it really just UC and CSU right now?
my understanding is that the plan is for this to be an application platform for all three public segments.
Okay.
To answer Tom's earlier question about the 95%, my understanding of the intent in the legislation is for this to be rolled out across the entire state and to reach all public high school students. And so 95% was drafted initially here as a number that we thought would be a very ambitious goal, while being realistic about whether, you know, a literal 100% reach is going to happen by summer 2026. And so the number is aiming to be very specific while representing the ambition of getting statewide reach.
Okay, thank you.
I see Jessica and Gavin.
Mhm.
Jessica? Oh, sorry. Gavin.
Oh, no,
Jessica, good.
yeah. Kind of similar to Thomas being concerned for the AICCU schools, I guess I'm wondering about, so is it saying that in addition to being a one-stop shop to launch these like public and potentially private school applications, it's also for, I guess I'm not sure to what extent it can be a one-stop shop for financial aid, because like they could certainly launch like their FAFSA or California Dream Act application through the platform, but I don't think it's within scope to say that it's going to be the one-stop shop for financial aid, because there's so much that happens like with us at CSAC, at individual institutions, like there are additional applications that I don't think are going to be collected. So I don't know how it could be a one-stop shop for financial aid. So I don't know if like that's kind of just like the vision, or like, I guess I don't know, like, why call it a one-stop shop when like it's really, that seems like a pretty narrow, because we don't want to, I guess something we've been concerned about at CSAC is not wanting to have students be confused about like, oh, it's on californiacolleges.edu, I don't have anything else to do, when in reality they could still have multiple processes they need to go through either at CSAC or their institution in order to actually complete the financial aid application process. So I guess I'm kind of wondering how that's scoped out.
So I think it's the analogy, maybe by way of analogy, it's similar to thinking about applying to CSU, right? It's not that because you launch your CSU application within californiacolleges.edu that it all happens within that, right? It has an integration with CSU's application and ensures that the information is transferred and the whole process is complete. For the financial aid, it's about launching the process from californiacolleges.edu, and then that takes students to the relevant platform, right? Either FAFSA or CADA. The benefit of having, and unfortunately our ad hoc member Catalina wasn't able to make it today, but as she's shared in previous meetings, when students launch their financial aid applications via the platforms, it gives the guidance counselors and other practitioners who are working with them visibility into who has started applications, and gives them the tools they need to be able to then reach out and support students in completing that, which ties in with the state's goals of having financial aid applications FAFSA and CADA completed by as many high school students as possible. So that's the reason for having the one-stop shop approach, applying both for the application component and for the launching of financial aid applications, because that integrated nature of it gives the people who are supporting our young people and applying the visibility that they need to be able to target supports.
Thank you, Marianne. Gavin?
So I like that comment, especially as I was just going to comment on Thomas's offer for the sort of pushing the envelope on this, and so I'd love to sort of hear about the feasibility of the activity, and it's possible that we might be able to add a sort of fall 2025 for the nonprofits as part of the activity going on. I know we can't do it now because we don't have any sense of what that feasibility is, but I think I want to just add a +1 on the ambition on that piece.
Tom, what would you consider to be a good objective if we were to entertain that as a committee? Would it be to conduct the feasibility on making that happen, or to or to have a much more, to have a much deeper sort of implementation objective in there?
I think perhaps keeping it general at this point, applying to California colleges and universities. And I don't know if language can be crafted to say perhaps. Sorry, I'm not sure if you can hear the background noise. Apologies for that if you did. And just lost my train of thought. I think perhaps keeping it general, and that would say that could lay out capturing as many nonprofit colleges and universities at first, and then with the idea of expansion in later dates.
So I'm hearing there one way could be just to generalize that objective, so it's not explicitly stating public colleges and universities, and perhaps it's just for applying to colleges and universities as one step.
California colleges and universities.
Yeah, California colleges and universities.
Marianne?
Would it be helpful if between now and the governing board meeting in August, our office provided some information to you about the feasibility of this? I want to, the one piece that I just want to be sure we're thoughtful about is we want to make sure we're able to deliver on the objectives. And if there's a real difference in terms of the ability of the platform to link on the back end with applications between the public universities and the ones that aren't, perhaps we could do a bit of research on this and provide you with more information between now and the governing board meeting. Would that be helpful?
That sounds helpful to me. How does it sound to the rest of the ad hoc committee?
So what's the intent then for this specific bullet point right now?
Would the intent then, Marianne, if we were to do that, to get as close as possible to generalizing it so that we all feel comfortable with it, and then there's some form of feasibility that we're trying to that the office will try to do between now and the governing board meeting in August? Would those be the next steps?
So I'm happy to offer that the office can connect with californiacolleges.edu and get much more specific information about what is feasible now, what may be feasible, say, in 2 years on non-public colleges and universities. And that may look different across nonprofits, for-profits, and those who use the common application. So I think step one would be that we get much more specific information. I want to make sure I'm not speaking on their behalf about what's possible about those three. And then based on that information, could either leave this bullet point as is, or in the August governing board meeting, we could draft in preparation for that with the committee chair or whatever you just determined is the best vehicle, either a complementary bullet point or edits to this bullet point based on that feasibility assessment. Would any of that be helpful?
That's helpful to me. Tom, does that sound helpful to you?
So would we still be voting today on recommending this language to the board? Because if that's the case, I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, one thing we could do is similar to what we did in the last meeting, where we sort of disaggregated the objectives and kind of look at each of these one by one to determine what can move forward, at least at the moment, and then what would still need to be workshopped with some information behind the scenes. Is that a possibility, Marianne?
Perhaps if I can make a suggestion before Mary Ann answers that, Robert.
Sure.
Perhaps we can have a second line or something some addition to this bullet saying that the of inclusion of non-public institutions.
Gavin?
Sort of just to check, Tom, I wanted to get a sense from you about in your conversations with your member institutions, if they're ready for this as well on their side of the equation. It'd be hard to set a goal for all of us if they wouldn't be comfortable with that goal as well.
Sorry, Gavin, I was cutting out a little bit. Was that for me?
Yeah, sort of a general question. What's your sense of your member institutions and their readiness and ability to do the work as well? So it'd be hard for us to set a goal that we sort of don't have a sense yet is obtainable.
Yeah, certainly understand that. And yeah, I think between now and August as well, to Mary Ann's point, we'll do our own outreach and in communication with the C2C staff. But the feasibility of that, for sure. But no, I do want to, one mentioned, or stress, to your point earlier, Gavin, about pushing the envelope on this a bit more. And I think having some language that includes, an intent to include the non-public institutions would, make this go would make me feel much more comfortable with this language, with the understanding that, between now and the next meeting, next governing board meeting, we'll try to dig up some more information.
Great. Jessica, do you want to add to that conversation, or should I switch to Mary Ann?
You could switch to Mary Ann. I'm just still thinking about the financial aid piece. So you can close the loop on the private institutions.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
So I'm reflecting on Tom's latest feedback, and I'm wondering if we want to, we could split the bullet point potentially, and think about having a separate one that talks about assessing the feasibility, for instance, of Common App applications by fall 2024. And have that be about assessing the feasibility, again, for the reasons Gavin mentioned. I think the one thing that I want to highlight is the language here on these two bullet points starts with promote and champion, because this is not work that we as Cradle-to-Career as an office are doing directly. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think the way that we've gone into this work and thinking about the objectives is how to frame work that we as an office, that you as a governing board, that we with our data providers are doing. And the work on our practical tools is with partners. And we're championing that work, we're promoting the work, but it's not work that we as an office are doing directly. So I just mentioned that context as well. Perhaps that can help us in refining and shaping the final language for this. So that was two ideas. One is whether splitting out something about assessing the feasibility of Common App integration is something that may be a helpful separate thing, either for this high level objective or something that we could put in our annual work plan for our office this year, because the work plan flows directly from these objectives. So we could either make that here or have that be something that have that be a high level objective or something in our work plan. And the second thought is just to be mindful of the fact that this is work we're doing with partners. And so there's a reason why the bullet points currently start with the words promote and champion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Jessica?
Yeah, no, I so I guess again, yeah, I think Mary Ann's idea about spinning it off into an accessibility feasibility study would make sense, just in terms of what we can actually vote on today in order to bring to the August full meeting. but again, with the for financial aid, I think I've been thinking about it, and I think if it said like one-stop shop for applying to colleges and universities and for like originating financial aid applications, because again, I don't like, it's not within the purview for California colleges to complete the application process. Like you can complete a college application. Financial aid applications are really completed at the college. And I don't think that's really in the scope of California colleges to supplant. So yeah, just thinking that clarification.
That's helpful. I mean, another way to do it would be to workshop the one-stop shop term, right? Which
Sure.
has a connotation. I mean, you could say it's a destination or
Mhm.
a top with something to that effect, right? Like
Like
I don't know,
portal,
right?
maybe?
Yeah, I mean, we could workshop it. I don't know enough about californiacolleges.edu to know whether that's the way that they're hoping to bill the site, or that we're hoping to champion it as precisely that.
Mhm.
But it could come in that form, or I mean, if you're comfortable with it saying, and for originating financial aid applications, and the rest of the committee is comfortable with that as well, then that could be another option for us too.
Thank you. I'm noticing the time as we're nearing 2 o'clock. I'm wondering what a motion might look like at this point.
Well, let me ask the group first. Are there any challenges with the first and the third bullet?
Seeing head shaking no.
Okay, so it's really the second, and one way we could do it would be to create or to adopt some of the proposed revisions already, such as generalizing some of the language to make it more to make it fit ideas that have been presented already, and then to consider, as Marianne mentioned, a possible spin-off bullet point that would acknowledge the desire for an exploration around the Common App integration. Was that what you had in mind, Marianne?
Yes, I think if we put in a draft one, again, I would like to check with our colleagues first, and don't want to speak on their behalf at California colleges, but assessing the feasibility of Common App integration could be a separate bullet point that speaks to this inclusion. If that kind of addresses some of the concerns that Tom and Gavin and others were raising.
At this point, let me ask back on Robert's point. 1 and now number 4 are looking good. Is number 3 good if we peel out? I'm sorry, number 2, if we have that third bullet now?
What did the committee members think about the way that number 2 looks with that amended language?
Yeah, Tom?
For me, better. I think if the removal of public makes sense, if it gives broad enough coverage, where, even if, we're not promoting the nonprofits yet, but only the publics, by fall 2024, at the same time that we have 3, I think, that bullet point 3, I think that provides enough coverage for that. But I'll be curious to hear what others have to say.
Just for the sake of discussion, if we remove public, then we have clearance to do an internal process for assessing the feasibility. And I don't know that we need to make it a separate goal that we hold ourselves to. The question is, though, in removing the word public, do we set ourselves an unattainable goal?
Right. Marianne?
I was going to ask a question similar to Gavin's, which is what the state and what the ad hoc committee's comfort level be with removing the word public could be agreed to be a one-stop shop for all colleges and universities, nonprofits, for-profits. There are a wide range of both accredited and unaccredited higher education institutions. So just ask that question, whether removing the word public might end up creating an objective here that is not within the scope of Cradle-to-Career's, work between now and summer in 2026.
And separate and apart from any feasibility issues. I totally agree.
Thank you, Marianne.
So I think
Right. Go
my
ahead.
sense is we have the third bullet, then we keep public in the second bullet, and then we just create a third bullet that says that we assess the feasibility of inclusion of Common App institutions by the same time frame, or by a different time frame. I don't, Tom, you have to I think weigh in on time frames there.
How about we use a descriptor in bullet point 2 instead of using public, just say a wide range of colleges and universities.
From a process standpoint, kind of leaning back into those SMART goals a little bit. So the specific, the measurable.
I hear you. So maybe our best course of action would be to keep public there and then tease out what a third bullet point would look like for Common App institutions. Marianne, did you have a comment?
The other thing I was going to offer is that, like we did with the last time, if we can be helpful as an office in kind of finalizing the language with the ad hoc committee chair and one additional member, we'd be happy to do that. I'm looking at the ed code right now, and section 10.870 speaks to some of this, including being the single point of entry for submitting college and university applications and applications for financial aid. So there may be a way, the one-stop language, and some of that was drawn from the legislation. There may be a way for us to kind of refresh our memories, go back to that, and then refine based on the comments from this with the committee chair and one additional member, as we did with the last round, if that might be a possibility.
I really like that, Marianne. I really like the reference back to the legislation that gives us our scope. And I think that one of the things for us to be mindful of is not to try to do too broad reaching, too sort of amorphous. I mean, even though it's very aspirational, we're really talking about goals and objectives here and things that need to be measured and concrete and done. And we are just in this bullet point still talking about promoting, so just out there.
So what do we
It's true.
do? Thank you.
So then that would lead us to a motion like as it appears right now on our screen, which would be to move to recommend to the governing board to approve the practical tools goal and objectives 1 and 3 as specified in the staff report, and then revisions of 2 as noted.
So just to clarify, would we be recommending to the governing board with those revisions, or is that a move to revise 2? It's unclear to me.
I mean, I'd say the revised version of 2, based on what we're seeing in front of us. And then your other recommendation, Marianne, would be to tease out what a third one would look like with the Common App institutions.
Yes, what's currently bullet point 4.
Okay. So then, Gavin, did you have something?
So it strikes me if we're adding the additional bullet, that we could approve all three of the previous and then do a process whereby the chair and one person are empowered to add the fourth bullet that captures the assessing the feasibility, the fourth bullet. Because my sense is we had put to bed number 2 with the proviso that we were doing an additional bullet. Is that correct? What's the sense?
That was my sense as well. Is that the sense from others?
Yeah, that was my understanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can go ahead and approve all three of those as adjusted by the additional word in number 2, and then do the assessing feasibility language for bullet 4 with the proviso that that language will get worked out per our intent, and then we sign off on the chair and one person
So if,
putting that forward as a fourth bullet.
if someone moves, let me help you guys with the motion. So move to
Yeah.
recommend to the governing board to approve the practical goals and objectives 1 and 2 as specified in the staff report. And then say something like objective 2 as amended by the
Correct.
committee, and item 4 as discussed by the committee and drafted by staff with approval of the committee chair and one other member, or something like that.
Yeah, I would only give offer the out that if we find that it's completely infeasible to do it, then we should not have a fourth bullet.
Yeah, but we're not going to be discussing the feasibility before we have
That's
that
fair.
fourth bullet.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I withdraw.
I know this is a mouthful, but at least if this is the motion, I think it captures what I understand you want to do.
So let me read it again for the group. Move to recommend to the governing board to approve the practical tools, goal and objectives 1 and 3 as specified in the staff report. I guess it should say their objective 2
It should say
as amended.
it should say yes to approve objective 2. You don't even have to put approve. You could, again, because we've already moved to
So we would
recommend
just
to
so
approve.
it should just be objective 2, right? Objective 2
Yeah,
as amended by the committee. And item 4 as discussed by the committee and drafted by staff and approved by the chair and one committee member.
yeah. And we should say objective 4. I don't know why I put item, I'm sorry.
Okay, and objective 4 as discussed by the committee, drafted by staff and approved by are we talking about the ad hoc chair or the ad hoc committee chair or the governing board chair?
Ad hoc committee chair.
Okay, and approved by the committee chair and one committee member. Would like to make a motion.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
I'll second.
Okay, before we take action, let's pause for public comment. Mary Kate.
We will now be opening it up to public item on this agenda, public comment, excuse me, on this agenda item. So if there are any folks in the audience that would like to raise their hand to make a comment. I'm not seeing any hands. I'll give you another moment. Seeing no changes, we will be closing public comment at this time.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Mary Kate, let's do a roll call vote.
Robert,
Yes.
Catalina, Amy,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Wonderful. Let's move on to our next item, which is discussion of Cradle-to-Career engagement, goal and objectives. Jane, let me turn it over to you.
All right, we've got about 20 minutes left, and I'm going to set the stage here that there's a few more objectives to discuss on this one. So let's jump right into it. Marianne, you want to cover the problem?
Thank you, Jane. So we framed the problem as communities lack equitable access to usable information and data to address their priorities. So that's the problem that you had reviewed and discussed in the first meeting. The goal is drafted as different types of users will need different types of information when accessing the data system, and Cradle-to-Career will engage with communities to listen to and identify their information needs through our user-centered design work, community engagement activities, and trainings and outreach for the data system's practical tools with a governance structure that reflects and supports these priorities. And that's a mouthful. The shorthand for this is we want to create things that are useful and actually get used. And so the next objectives go into that, where we attempted to create measurable ways to look at this. For the public listening in, again, all of these are in the public materials for this meeting. I think they're split across 3 slides here. So I'll just read them out. Identify key communities and contracts for outreach and input. Establish outreach goal by summer 2023. That will including identify data ambassadors, partnerships in key communities, and defining key communities. And then for reach, 70% of C2C identified advocacy groups who engage with key communities. Next bullet point, define C2C's brand identity and communication strategy by fall 2023. Next, establish baseline metrics for public-facing products for reporting by summer 2024. So this would be our dashboards. For instance, we would expect that by next summer, we'd establish baseline metrics for how those are accessed and what level of reach they have. Next, ensure information is trusted and useful by prioritizing transparency in communications and processes. This is ongoing and with measurable metrics by summer 2024. And then the last 2, prioritize quality of engagement. C2C promotes equitable access to its engagement and activities by region and key communities, ongoing and with measurable metrics by summer 2026, and prioritize actionable information. C2C data informs decisions, policy, and research, ongoing and with measurable metrics by summer 2026. So these last 2 are intended to be kind of overarching metrics that we look and track by the summer 2026 goal. Okay.
Great, thank you, Marianne. Discussion? Which slide can I go to also? Gavin?
So I love these, but I just want to do a little bit of a stress test with you, Marianne, that you gauge that these are attainable in the timeframes you've identified.
I think they're attainable if you read the literal interpretation of them. So we're saying we will define baseline metrics. We're going to define kind of what the metrics will be. And then that is what we wanted to do is make sure we're intentional early on about here's what we're going to look for. Those metrics are going to be pretty sparse in the early years because you won't have prior years to compare to, right? So over time, the amount of information we have will grow. But we do want to hold ourselves accountable to looking at this from the start.
That's perfect. I have no other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Tom?
Thank you. Can we go back to that last one, that last slide? Yeah, this one. I'm going to sound like a lawyer because I'm going to ask for definitions, so I apologize. How are you looking at region? And what do you mean by, in the second bullet point, what do you mean by informs decisions, policy, and research? So I guess more of like, well, what does informs mean and imply.
Gavin, I think you broke up for me right there at the end of that comment, but I think we heard the question. I'm sorry, Tom.
Oh, sorry. Let me turn off my camera. If you need me to say it again, I'll be happy to.
Let's start with the region question. Oh, go ahead, Marianne.
I think I heard it. Thank you, Tom. For region, we have not yet defined that. We could do this either by specific pre-existing regional divisions that are used commonly. So thinking about broad regions of the state like Central Valley versus Southern California, Northern California, or more specifically around specific legislative districts or other things like that. For informing decisions, policy, and research, the way that we would look to this is to, for example, keep a running list of published research studies that use data from the C2C data system. We would have our engagement and communications staff track references to the data system or the data or studies that were based on our data in ongoing policy discussions and public documents. So this would be a little bit different from, for example, measuring how many unique visitors different pages on our website have. But I think it's important that we have a goal like this so that we're not just looking at, how many views did a dashboard get, but is this something that is being used and useful in the ongoing policy conversations, decisions that decision makers make, and research that is being done on California issues.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
What else? I'll go back a slide. Let me go back to the first slide.
I have a question about for the second sub-bullet, reach 70%. So what is that saying? That we're going to engage with 70% of identified groups?
It's in reference to the broader first bullet point. So by the end of the summer, we want to have completed our work of establishing specific outreach goals that identify key communities and contacts for our outreach. And then our goal would be to reach at least 70% of those that we've put on the list in our early work.
All right.
Thank you. Others?
So it looks like we'll need to amend that first. It looks like there's a typo in it. It's contacts, right? Not as opposed to contracts. Identify key communities and contacts.
Shannon, can I ask you to double confirm that? Because I just said contacts out loud and I want to make sure I'm not misspeaking.
It is contacts. Apologies.
Contacts. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're also doing lots of relevant contracts for our work. So I just wanted to make sure I wasn't
It's inclusive. Inclusive.
All right, others, can I move to another slide for anybody? I know you have it in front of you also. So. Okay, not seeing any additional comments from our committee members at this point.
Do we feel comfortable with making a motion to recommend to the governing board to approve the engagement goal and objectives?
As amended in the staff report. And with that, I will make the motion.
I'll second.
I see.
Sorry, let me get clear on that one. As amended in the staff report or as amended in this meeting?
Oh.
I might be off.
Say as amended by the
No,
committee.
we struck, as amended by the committee, yeah. We struck one letter.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a motion. We also have a second. Let's turn it over to Mary Kate for public comment.
Okay, we will now be opening it up for public comment on this item. If there's any folks in the audience that would like to make a comment, please just raise your hand and I will unmute you. I'm not seeing any public comment at this time. I'll give folks another minute, few seconds. Seeing no change, we can close public comment.
So we have a motion and a second, and we're ready for a roll call vote.
Robert,
Yes.
Catalina, Amy,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
the motion passes.
Fantastic. We'll now be moving on to agenda item 7, discussion of next steps for planning. We have 9 minutes. Jane.
All right. Well, I think we've hit quite a bit of that discussion already. So we're wrapping up meeting 3 today. It looks like we are set to go for the governing board. We know that with practical tools, there's a little bit of work that's going to happen between now and then. We captured that in the motion. And so as it stands right now, we will prepare the recommendations as approved by this committee to move forward to the governing board in August. Any questions or comments about next steps?
Should we be designating a committee member to work on that item from the practical tools
That'd probably be helpful.
section?
I hear a
Okay.
request.
Can I recommend Tom?
Why? I'm kidding. Yes, Robert, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any others in next steps?
Just to clarify, so this is an ad hoc committee that will be recreated next year for the same process, yes? Or is this it?
I'll defer that to Marianne.
Our legislation talks about one of the board's responsibilities being annual strategic planning. One of the things we discussed, I think at the February meeting, if I'm remembering correctly, is that it makes sense to create a 3-year strategic plan, which is what you're doing right now. And then the board can revisit that annually. And so I think it's up to the board how it chooses to revisit that annual plan in the next, how it chooses to revisit the strategic plan in each of the next 2 years.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Any other questions on next steps? All right. Our next item.
So we have public comment here for next steps. I'll turn it over to Mary Kate.
Perfect. So we'll now be opening it up to the public. If there's any general public comments that they would like to make, please feel free to raise your hand at this time, and I'll unmute you to be able to make your comment. I'm not seeing any hands raised. We'll give it another moment. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Thank you.
Okay, agenda item 9, future agenda items. At this point, I'd like to hear from board members if they have any future agenda items to propose, then we'll open it up for public comment. Seeing none right now, we'll open it up for public comment.
Perfect. If the members of the audience would like to make any comments on any future agenda items that they'd like to see, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll unmute you. I'm not seeing any hands at this time, but I'll give it another moment. Still seeing none, we can close public comment. Thank you.
Okay, so we turn to our last and most important agenda item, which is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And there's the second. Thank you so much. It looks like we're ready to adjourn. It is 2:25 p.m. I'd like to thank the ad hoc committee members for not just your engagement during this particular planning session, but throughout the course of the work that we did in an ad hoc fashion. We're ready for our August board meeting. And I also want to thank our C2C staff, the entire office, for all of the contributions that they've made to help us get to this point. To LRI, our partners, and to all of the members of the public who have contributed their ideas throughout every step of this strategic planning work. And with that, we are adjourned at 2:26 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.